How's everybody doing tonight? The nice weather has returned. It took a bit, and we're there. We had snow flurries last night. It's a pleasure to see all of you. We are always excited about our Whitaker series. It's the centennial of Miles Davis. Great. We got House of Miles from East St. Louis over here hanging out. If you get a chance, go check them out. And essentially what this speaker series is, there's 4 shows that covers the history of Miles Davis. We have a talk, and then a band's going to play afterwards. And we try to have a St. Louis connection for all of these. And tonight's no different from the previous ones. So the Whitaker Foundation is funding these, and we appreciate their support with these shows. We give the Whitaker Foundation a round of applause. And like I always tell everybody, if you're ever in mid-sized cities like St. Louis, there's never a place like Jazz St. Louis. It's a very unique place. And we get to do a lot of cool stuff like Whitaker events and education events. We serve over 2,000 kids every year. That's in large part to our season sponsor, Worldwide Technologies and Stewart Family Foundation, and from folks like you coming out to shows and donating money. Now, our speaker tonight is a professor at WashU, and I'm going to commit one of my own faux pas that I'm going to be reading part of her biography because she has done so much that it's easier for me to just keep some notes together. So WashU is doing a lot of great work within their ethnomusicology department. If you don't know what ethnomusicology means, it's studying music culture. That's one aspect of that instead of just music history or performance. So Dr. Kurtz is an assistant professor of ethnomusicology in both the Music and African American Studies department. Her research explores African diasporic music dance practices at sites where practitioners contest injustice and transform their worlds. Her book is called A Beautiful Fight, The Racial Politics of Capoeira and Backland Bahia, and it's on the University of Michigan Press. It just came out last year. It's an ethnographic study of black and white practitioner interpretations of capoeira's spirituality and political anti-racist potentials. Her new project is exploring how St. Louis jazz musicians resist racial capitalism and define alternative value systems, and she's been a great asset to the community. So, can we give Dr. Kurtz a nice, big, warm St. Louis welcome?
Thank you so much. All right, let me get started. Okay, sorry I gave you all those big words. I'm not going to talk the way I wrote my bio. All right, phew. All right, so a little slideshow. If you can, hopefully you can see the slides. If not, it's okay. It's mostly what I'm going to be saying, but there are a few little visual things to go along with it. So I'm going to start with a quote from Miles Davis's autobiography. In all these quotes, I'm going to read a longer quote, but I put a shorter one up on the board just so it's easier to follow along. Okay. As a musician, so this is Miles Davis. As a musician and as an artist, I have always wanted to reach as many people as I could through my music, because I never thought that the music called jazz was ever meant to reach just a small group of people or become a museum thing locked under glass like all other dead things. I always thought it should reach as many people as it could, like so-called popular music, and why not? I always thought that the music had no boundaries, no limits to where it could grow and go, no restrictions on its creativity. Good music is good no matter what kind of music it is. And I always hated categories, always. Never thought it had any place in music. So I just started with that quote to frame this whole talk, because I think it's really important insight into his philosophy. So I don't know how many of you were at the previous Whitakers. The Whitaker Speaks about Miles Davis. Yes? Okay, great, good. That makes my job easier. So I'm going to do a really quick review, but we're not going to get into depth. The 1950s, as you know, Miles Davis basically reinvented jazz a couple times over. He had his cool modal period with kind of blue, and then he had his first quintet where he expanded hard bop vocabulary and sound. And then in the 1960s, he had his second quintet with Wayne Shorter on sax, Herbie Hancock on piano, Tony Williams on drums, and the 17-year-old Tony Williams, and Ron Carter on bass. And here they stretched out the hard bop sound, and they played what many people refer to as time no changes approach, and they took modal playing even further, and they experimented with freedom, even though they weren't playing in the free jazz style of like Ornette Coleman or even Coltrane. They were still experimenting with freedom for sure. But in 1964, Miles Davis wrote, "All of a sudden, jazz became passé." It was no longer the popular music of the day, right? The way when he had grown up, and big band and even bebop had that feel to it, that it was like current. Instead, it was now the Beatles, it was Elvis, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Bob Dylan, James Brown, and Motown, all the great artists on Motown. So the question is, what would Miles do next? Well, if you're here, you know what he did. He went electric, right? Okay. Yes. Yeah, fusion. But one of the questions I want to talk about tonight is, why did he do it? Why did he go electric? But before I even go any further, I just want to settle a major debate that's been, the jazz community has been embroiled in this debate for many, many years. Was Miles a sellout, or was he a true artist? And my answer is, we're going to settle it. That's just not a good question, right? Because all musicians want to make money. Why do we all get to make money and musicians don't get to make money? And it's very clear, at least I'm totally convinced, that he also wanted to make good music. So I say both, and it's settled. But instead, we're going to talk about why he did it, and what he was searching for, and how he moved on, and what were his musical influences. I also want to talk about what was going on culturally and politically in this time, and sort of try to figure out, did this have an impact on his music, and if so, what was it? And, just to keep in mind, we could ask this same question about all of the amazing musicians that he collaborated with, but I only have 45 minutes, and it is Miles' 100th birthday, so we're focusing on him. And then the third question is, why does this matter? What is important about this transition? What's important about this period of the music for its time and for the future going forward? So, in 1967, and all these quotes that I'm taking from Miles Davis come from his autobiography, he wrote that he was moving toward a guitar sound. He was listening to Muddy Waters and James Brown and B.B. King, and he said he was already moving towards a guitar sound and trying to find a way to get that kind of voicing in his music. So just to get some of that voicing in our heads, I'm going to play a little bit of Muddy Waters, who you see on the left, and then a little James Brown, who's on the right.
My great-grandma did.
That's not it. That was something else. We're getting to that.
The gypsy woman told my mother before I was born, you got a boy child coming, gonna be a son of a gun. He gonna make pretty women's jump and shout. Then the world wanna know what this all about, but you know I'm here. Everybody knows I'm here. Well, you know the hoochie coochie man. Everybody knows I'm here.
I'm sorry. I don't have time. But yes, okay. Let's just do a little James Brown.
Come
sucks to have to cut it off like that. But so there we had some of the guitar that we're talking about. So another quote. This is Miles again. I could feel myself starting to want to change, but I didn't really know yet what this change was all about. I knew it had something to do with the guitar voice in my music, and I was beginning to get interested in what electrical instrumental voicing could do in my music. I knew I had to get some of what Muddy Waters was doing up in my music. You know, the sound of the $1.50 drums and the harmonicas and the two-chord blues. I had to get back to that now because what we had been doing was just getting really abstracted. That was cool while we did it, but I just wanted to get back to that sound from where I had come. So he was moving forward, but he was looking and listening back. But he wasn't looking back to bebop, and he wasn't even looking back to NOLA style, New Orleans style traditional jazz. He was looking back to the blues and to the juke joints of his youth. This is what I see as a continuity in the tradition as he's innovating. And this is my main point of the talk tonight. It makes me think of the Ghanaian Adinkra symbol, Sankofa. Sankofa can be translated as a proverb really quickly as go back and get it. But what you see is, what it means is going back to the past and getting the knowledge and the wisdom and the things of value from the past and bringing them into the present and making something new to build a better future. And the image here, the symbol, has a bird who's facing forward but looking all the way back. And there's an egg in their mouth, and the egg symbolizes that beautiful wisdom and knowledge. And it also symbolizes that yet to be born potential, right? The new things that can be created. So this is what I think Miles was doing. He was going back to the past, but he was doing it in order to create something new and shaping the future in ways that he didn't even know, how it would play out. I just want to make clear that this is something that we can't necessarily hear in the music. Some of the music I'll be playing tonight, definitely at the time that it came out, sounded completely new and different. So it's not only just the way it sounds. We might not be able to identify it that way, but it was concepts and practices and even feelings that he was bringing from the past into the present. So in 1967, December, Herbie Hancock played electric piano for the first time on a Miles Davis recording, even though it wouldn't be released until much later. And this electric piano was helping him fill out this bass sound and giving it a heavier bottom end. So this is part of what was attracting him to the electric piano, Miles and Herbie. And then in the same year, he met Betty Mabry, a singer-songwriter, an artist in her own right. And she was also friends with Jimi Hendrix and Sly Stone and introduced Miles Davis to Jimi Hendrix and Sly Stone and to their music, and he began listening to them. Betty and Miles were only married for a year, but it had a profound influence on Miles Davis's life, especially on his music, is the way he tells it, and also on his personal style. He completely changed how he dressed. So we have on the left, his Brooks Brothers buttoned-up suit that he used to wear all through the 40s and 50s, and 60s, and then after meeting Betty, he transitioned into give me some adjectives. I don't know it's just amazing. Okay, this very hip, expressive style. All right, so I want to listen to a little Jimi Hendrix and Sly and Betty just to get those sounds in our heads too, because this is what he was really into at the time. All right. So I'm going to do 2 tracks of Jimi, a little bit of the first one. This is off Electric Ladyland. So, maybe not what you expected, but this is on the album. It's from 1968, and it's pretty avant-garde, I have to say, right? We were expecting rock and roll. Can you tell the difference? But I'll play the next track. More what we expect. Okay. And finally, Sly. Sorry. Okay, and finally, Betty Davis. This is from a few years after she was no longer with Miles, but it still gives you a sense of her music.
They say I'm different 'cause I'm a piece of sugar cane. Sweet to the core, that's right, I got a rhythm. My great-grandma didn't like the foxtrot. Now instead she spit, it's nothing but a jam on jam. Spit on. They say I'm different 'cause I eat chitlins. I can't help it, I was born and raised on them. That's right, every morning have to slop the hogs and maybe getting off humping the jolly hooker. Get it on.
Okay, I don't want to be like the professor, but I do want you to listen to the. I know a lot of you are listening, but some. Okay, but just to refresh your memory if you aren't listening closely, we heard a lot of guitar in these tracks, and in some of them especially we hear this like driving dance rhythm, and especially in the James Brown there was this sense that like every member of the band is now playing rhythm, not just the rhythm section, right? So this is something that he's going to take into the music. But before we do that, I want to go to my second question. I don't have to keep reaching like this. Okay, what's going on? What's going on culturally and politically? So I know I could do this if we had more time. I could ask everyone to to answer the question, but to save time, really quickly, we know this is the 60s. It's the civil rights era. Some victories have been made, but there's many battles still to be waged. It's also the space age, right? It's the space race with Russia at the height of the Cold War. Who's going to put the first man on the moon? And it's also the time of African decolonization. Countries in Africa are throwing off their colonial oppressors, and this is having a huge impact all over the world. And Miles definitely was aware of all of this. And he writes about some of these events in his autobiography, but he says very little. In 1968, in April, when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, Miles Davis wrote, "The country erupted into violence again." He had written 3 years earlier in 1965, while he was recuperating from hip surgery, that he had watched the Watts riots on the television. But he doesn't elaborate anymore, right? He doesn't talk about what he was feeling or thinking about these things. So how can we tell if they influenced his music? It's really hard. And the answer is we really can't, right? We can't get inside his head. But I think that we need to go back to the beginning. Like the Sankofa, we need to look back. So I'm going to ask, what was going on in 1926 in his youth? So the one event that Miles does discuss in depth and detail in his autobiography is the East St. Louis massacre of July 1917, when hundreds of men and women, white men and women, massacred probably hundreds of their black neighbors, men, women, children, and babies. While he was growing up, black people in East St. Louis talked about this. They passed on the memory and very likely passed on the trauma. This means that he grew up with an intimate knowledge of the violence and brutal injustice of America's racial system. Yet this aspect is rarely mentioned by his biographers and music critics or music scholars. More commonly, they talk about Davis's upper middle class upbringing. His father was a wealthy, well-off dentist, and I think it's important to recognize both and look at them together. Yes, he was relatively sheltered and privileged, but he was also acutely aware of what he was being sheltered from. And his father also raised Miles not to be afraid, but to be confident in himself and proud of his blackness. So going on. What was going on in the 40s, 50s, and 60s? Miles for sure saw patterns. He wrote about how in 1917, black men were returning from World War I, where they fought for democracy, and then they were killed in the massacre. Black World War II and Korean veterans again returned to a country in which they still didn't have the rights that they were fighting for overseas. And then in the Vietnam War, disproportionate numbers of black soldiers were sent to combat. In the 1960s, he played at least 2 benefit concerts that we're aware of. So he was, in that sense, politically aware. And he was also very much oriented to Africa in terms of the music and the sounds, like many black artists of the time. His 1959 album, Kind of Blue, he wrote in his autobiography that he was actually inspired by the African finger piano that he had heard at a performance of Les Ballets Africains of Guinea in New York. And just 1 year later, he made sketches of Spain, and he also wrote how he was thinking about the African influence on Spanish music that arrived in Spain via the Moors, who occupied most of the Iberian Peninsula for hundreds of years. These albums aren't usually singled out as examples of expressing an African nationalist sentiment or sound, but that is how Miles Davis thought of them. And this orientation got even stronger as he went on to his electric turn. So we can't say that Miles was apolitical, but at the same time, we can't say that he was an activist in the way that Max Roach and Abbey Lincoln were with their Freedom Now suite, or even Charles Mingus with his original Fabus Fables tune. Not at least until much later in 1985, Miles did come out with a record called You're Under Arrest that was about racial profiling by police and environmental pollution, but that's much later. So perhaps he made his strongest statements on stage. Many scholars and audience members interpreted his stage demeanor as overt resistance to racism. You know, they talk about how he turned his back. Critics found him arrogant, aloof, and angry, but he refused to play to minstrel stereotypes. And then off the stage, he also set an example as a confident black man, unafraid to stand up for himself and speak back to racist white people that he confronted in his daily life. There were also many problems with his offstage behavior, the way he treated women, he was abusive, his misogyny. I'll just say for now that this is also part of the story and something we have to contend with, not excuse. But above all, Miles spoke through his music. Writing about how he finally got rid of liner notes in his albums in the early 60s, he wrote this: "I never thought there was nothing nobody could say about an album of mine. I just want everyone to listen to the music and make up their own minds. I never did like no one writing about what I played on an album, trying to explain what I was trying to do. The music speaks for itself." So this puts the responsibility of figuring out the meaning of the music on us, the listeners. And I believe that understanding where he came from can help us understand where he was going. So, back to the theme. 4 things that I want you and us to listen to through the next bunch of musical examples I'm going to play are these. Rhythm. So one of the things that changed in this period is he was straightening out the swing rhythm and finding more straight eights and a groove. And he was doing this also in part by strengthening the bass sound. So having the electric pianos, the electric bass, electric guitar allowed the bass sound to get much bigger. And so we're hearing the rhythm also lower in the bass. He used electronics, the instruments I just mentioned, piano, electric guitar, electric bass. and distorted sounds, like we heard Jimi Hendrix on the guitar. And then he was also using tape editing techniques. So this is in the recording studio, splicing the tape, cutting and pasting it back together, and looping. And another really important influence or component of this all was the Fender Rhodes, and we have one on stage. I was so glad to see that we were going to have. Of course, we needed a Fender. So he was listening to, the way he tells it, he was listening to Joe Zawinul play electric piano, which was the Wurlitzer in this case, and he was playing with who? Yes, I knew it. I knew you were going to know. Okay, so we're going to listen to a little bit of this. This is Mercy, Mercy, Mercy.
You know,
This is Mercy, Mercy, Mercy. Yeah, Mercy, Mercy. You can hear it. You can hear the Rhodes. I mean the Wurlitzer, sorry. Sorry. Okay. Well, we should play a little more. Okay, 'cause this is sorry. This is the solo right here. Yeah. Yes, this is Zawinul. Right. I was like, I can't cut him off. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. I just find that was recorded. This particular version was recorded in 1966, and to me it's such timeless music. It's like it doesn't sound old. It's quite. I mean, you could say that about a lot of this, but especially that track. Okay, anyway. All right. So around this time. Chick Corea on the left, Herbie Hancock on the right, they also started playing Fender Rhodes. So this was a transitional time in Miles's band and his career. This is what he wrote about the Fender Rhodes. He said, "See, the Fender Rhodes has one sound, and that sound is itself. You always know what it is. I'm crazy about the way Gil Evans voices his music, so I wanted to get me a Gil Evans sound in a small band. I could hear that you could write a bass line with voicings that Gil did in his big band. After I got this into my head and saw how that affected the music I was doing, I didn't need a piano anymore. It didn't have nothing to do with me just wanting to go electric, like a lot of people have said, just to have some electrical stuff up in my band. I just wanted that kind of voicing a Fender Rhodes could give me that a regular piano couldn't." And just an aside, we're talking about that heavy, the louder bass end, louder than what an acoustic piano can get. "All these purists are walking around talking about how electrical instruments will ruin music. Bad music is what will ruin music, not the not the instruments musicians choose to play. I don't see nothing wrong with electrical instruments as long as you get great musicians who will play them right." And he definitely had great musicians. So again, I think this sums up Davis's philosophy and his response to his critics. And I also want to point out, he's talking about listening to Gil Evans. This is the producer and arranger that he worked with way back in 1949 on The Birth of the Cool. 1949, right? And he also worked with Gil on Porgy and Bess in 1959 and Sketches of Spain in 1960. So again, he's looking back, but while he's blazing new ground. So there's a lot of continuity here. Again, Sankofa. This doesn't mean that his electric music sounded like Birth of the Cool, but he was taking the concepts and ideas and these, voicings, ideas of arrangement with him. And I think this is important because so many jazz critics accused him of abandoning the jazz tradition. So now we're going to transition to even more listening of some of the works leading up to the full-on electric fusion album. So Miles in the Sky, 1968, is what we could call like a proto-fusion. This is still the second great quintet, their last full studio album. But on this album, Herbie Hancock is playing Rhodes and Ron Carter is playing electric bass. So I'm going to play Stuff. You got to listen to this when you get home. All right. All right. Next came In a Silent Way, 1969. Here he added Chick Corea and Joe Zawinul on electric pianos, including Fender. So he had 3 keyboards on this album. He also had John McLaughlin on electric guitar, and now Dave Holland was playing double bass, but still not electric bass at this point. And the recording process, he brought in sketches to the studio just like he had done with Kind of Blue. So he didn't bring in complete compositions, but he brought in these incomplete tunes, and they sort of figured it out in the process of recording. So again, Sankofa. I'm going to play Peaceful from this album, and listen for, within the first few seconds of the track, you can already hear a tape edit. So he also was starting using these editing techniques. It's not a good place to stop. Anyway, so here, notice there's also this sort of drone happening, and this is an influence of Indian classical music. It has this sort of meditative ambient type of feel to it. And there's now we're starting to get this like driving rhythm, but it still doesn't sound funky. Like the dance music, and this track there was this track there was also there were more tape edits that were used to sort of create the form of the piece after they had already made the recording. Now in this period in 1968 to 1968 to 1970. Was also the time where he had this what's often referred to as the Lost Quintet. So when he was on the road touring, he was with Wayne Shorter, Chick Corea, Dave Holland, and Jack DeJohnette now on drums. But it was called the Lost Quintet because they never recorded a studio album, which is really a shame. But after touring for about half a year, after making In a Silent Way, they came back. And on the morning of August 18th, 1969, at Woodstock, Jimi Hendrix did what? Yeah, he performed a deconstructed version of the Star-Spangled Banner, again blurring the boundaries between rock and roll and avant-garde free improvisation. And the very next morning, on August 19th, 1969, the quintet and a bunch of other folks entered the studio to start recording Bitches Brew. So now, we had an expanded roster. Benny Maupin was on bass clarinet. Joe Zawinul was on electric piano. We had John McLaughlin again, and Airto Moreira on percussion, and a bunch of others. And Miles told the producer, Tio Macero, to let the tapes run and record everything. So I just have a few quotes of Miles and of Dave Holland about their experience. So Miles wrote about the session, I would direct, this is the Bitches Brew session, I would direct like a conductor. Once we started to play, I would either write down some music for somebody, or I would tell them to play different things I was hearing as the music was growing, coming together. It was loose and tight at the same time. It was casual but alert. Everybody was alert to different possibilities that were coming up in the music. So that recording was a development of the creative process, a living composition. It was like a fugue or motif that we all bounced off of. Dave Holland said that the recording process was often very fragmented. We'd have these sketches of ideas, and we'd play each for 10 minutes or so, and then we'd sort of stop, come to an ending of sorts, and then we might do one more take like that, and then move on to the next thing. Often I didn't know whether we were rehearsing or recording, but he knew that Miles was recording everything. And then Miles also said, that was a great recording session, man, and we didn't have any problems that I can remember. It was just like one of them old-time jam sessions we used to have up at Minton's back in the old bebop days. Everybody was excited when we left there each day. So it didn't sound like bebop that they played at Minton's, but it had the same excitement. So this is, again, I think he's reaching back and he's bringing something from those bebop days into the studio for Bitches Brew. Michael Veal describes the album, that we're going to listen to a little bit from it, as equal parts funk, experimental jazz, and psychedelic rock, both a collection of grooves and a succession of immersive environments. So this was not free jazz the way Ornette Coleman and John Coltrane were playing free jazz, but it was definitely free. And they were juxtaposing meters, right? There was like a free meter on top of the groove. And the form was also created in post-production. So Tio Macero shaped the tunes compositionally. He used tape cutting, tape splicing, and looping techniques on Bitches Brew. And he also applied reverb. And this is really important because it gives the album an atmosphere, this sort of sense of immersive sound, like it's in a much bigger space than the recording studio. So by many estimates, Bitches Brew would become Miles's second best-selling album after Kind of Blue. And it's hard to maybe imagine or remember quite the impact that it had, but people hadn't heard anything like this before when it came out. And people also had really strong emotions about this album, right? Okay, so we're gonna play a little bit. So I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. I just want to point out, I'm sorry. But we got to let the real musicians come on and play too. But I wanted to skip ahead to this part because there's this one place where you can really hear the splicing, the editing, and I know that that's hard. So you're going to hear a snap, and almost every time that you hear the snap, it's the same piece of tape being played again. So it's like a loop. So I'm just going to put on that part. Not yet. There it is. I mean, obviously, we can't do justice to the album with just like a few seconds, but it's very evocative of a mood, for sure. Okay, after this, Not to Sit Still, Miles recorded Jack Johnson, which was a soundtrack to the documentary Jack Johnson, or I think movie Jack Johnson, about boxer Jack Johnson, one of his idols, because Miles was also a boxer. And he said that he tried to emulate the shuffling, dance-like steps of the boxer in this music. So he was drawing on his embodied knowledge of boxing. And he also tried to capture the train rhythm, right? The plop, 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 plop sound of the train. So we're going to listen to Right Off. Sorry, okay. All right, so this sounds more like rock and roll, right? This is really jazz rock fusion. So in a way, he's reclaiming this like blues, the blues-based blackness of rock and roll. But after he made this album, he said, the question in my mind after I got to this was, well, is the music black enough? Does it have a black rhythm? Can you make the rhythm of the train a black thing? Would Jack Johnson dance to that? I was trying to play the music I grew up on now, that roadhouse, honky-tonk, funky thing that people used to dance to on Friday and Saturday nights. So again, Sankofa, he's looking back to his past, growing up in East St. Louis, and trying to remember those and capture those sounds again. So his next album is Live Evil, again, also recorded in 1970 and released in 1971. And here he had a large cohort of different musicians, again, entering the studio, including Brazil's unique musical treasure, Hermeto Pascoal. And the concept for this album, you can see it on the album cover, is reversal. So live is evil backwards, and other tracks, Salim is Miles backwards, and Sivat is Davis backwards. And he said he was playing with these contrasts of good and evil, light and dark, funky and abstract, and birth and death. So I'm just gonna play a tiny bit of one of the tracks. This is Little Church, with Hermeto whistling. I hate to stop it, but there's another track on this album, Gemini, that has this like really distorted guitar. So again, one track isn't enough to give the sense of the whole album. But here we can see that Miles is, he was famous for playing those ballads on Kind of Blue, and he's still playing ballads. And this one even has sort of reminiscent of the Gil Evans arrangements, those tight harmonies. So again, we can hear these. This time we can hear some of the continuity, but it's not exactly dance music. Meanwhile, Bitches Brew is selling faster than any other album that he had done, but it's mostly to young rock fans, most of whom are white. He's also touring with Carlos Santana. He's opening up for him, and this is how he got to play the Isle of Wight in England for over 350,000 people in the audience. That's just a picture of the crowd. I know, it's insane. And he was playing with Keith Jarrett and Gary Bartz. Here's a picture of their band. That's Keith Jarrett in the front. So they were really like rock musicians at this point. But the young black audience that he wanted to reach remained elusive. He wrote that Jimi Hendrix had been too far over into white rock for black audiences to connect with. He wrote, "Black kids were listening to Sly Stone, James Brown, Aretha Franklin, and all them other great black... Sorry, I keep turning it off. And all them other great black groups at Motown. After playing a lot of these white rock halls, I was starting to wonder why I shouldn't be trying to get to young black kids with my music. They were into funk music they could dance to. It took me a while to really get into the concept all the way, but with this new band, I started to think about it. I was getting interested in seeing the black sound develop, and that's where my head was moving toward. More rhythmic stuff, more funk rather than white rock." He also met the composer Paul Buckmaster around this time, and both of them were really into the composer Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, who was a avant-garde European composer. They both really liked how he used rhythm and space in his compositions. But he was thinking about Sly Stone and James Brown when he went into the studio on June 1972 to record On the Corner. So here we have the cover, one half of the cover, and he tried to create the street scene on the corner. There's sort of archetypes of people on the street, and he said that he was thinking about the street corner that he could see out of his father's office window in East St. Louis. So, just keeps falling down. There's a famous story about how this record was made that sort of gives a little insight into the process again. Dave Liebman was at his doctor's appointment, and he gets a call that Miles Davis wants him in the studio. He's never met him before, never played with him before, so he rushes there as soon as he can. He gets into the studio, and they hand him a microphone, and Dave Liebman plays soprano sax, and Miles Davis is like, "Play." And he says that there weren't enough headphones to use as monitors, but everyone in the band was plugged directly into the board. So all that Dave Liebman could hear was like the sort of like taps of like people on the keyboard, the electric keyboards and the percussion. So he was hearing this like tap, 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 patter, 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 and he had to play. And that's what you hear on the opening track of On the Corner. And again, just to drive home that all of the sort of composition of this album happened, or a lot of the composition of this album happened in the studio in post-production, clip cutting and pasting that tape. So here's On the Corner. All right, so here we finally have that sort of funky sound. There's a heavy bass, the rose and the electric bass. There's a distorted guitar, and there's, like I said, there were a lot of studio techniques used in the post-production. There were tape edits. There was, for the first time now, there was layering, and which is like overdub. They were doing overdubbing. So they had 16 tracks, but they were recording on top of those. So a lot of people have called this a proto-hip-hop or dub reggae album. They were using techniques, they were innovating techniques that would only go mainstream a little bit later. And then, of course, changed the course of music history. And this was, again, a much larger group. There were also, on other tracks you can hear, they had 2 electric sitars, the Indian instrument. They had several drummers and percussion and a tabla player, the Indian percussion instrument, and 2 electric basses. So now, we're almost at the end, and the music is going to start. But I want to ask, why does this matter? Why does Miles going electric matter? On the Corner didn't do as well as Miles had hoped. The existing jazz fans didn't like it. It didn't sound like jazz. And it didn't reach the black youth listeners as much as he had hoped. He blames Columbia for the marketing. But many people just found it difficult to listen to, and still do, although new generations continue to rediscover it. And many people, I think the consensus now is that Miles was far ahead of his time. So perhaps he was pointing to an Africanist future that we haven't even arrived at yet. And he got there by going back and getting it. So I hope that you have learned or heard one thing that you can take with you and listen for as you continue to enjoy Miles Davis's music and the music of the musicians who are carrying his legacy forward today. So thank you, and ashe.
Thank you, Dr. Kurtz. Can we get one more big round of applause? Great. You guys ready for some music? We got eight of us. We just need a couple minutes to strike the stage and just get a couple things changed, and we'll be right here. So,
yeah. And then I'm going to ask them a few questions, but don't worry, it won't take that long. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so the reason I'm still up here is I forget if I told you I was going to do this, but I'm an ethnographer, so I think the most important thing is to hear what musicians have to say. I mean, yes, I was very honored to be able to speak with you, but I think that the people who really hold all the knowledge are these musicians who are now on stage. So I just wanted to ask them, like, it's going to take just a couple seconds, but I wanted to ask what the music meant to them. You know, this third question that I asked is, why is this music important? So I wanted to ask, I don't know, I think Kendrick, do you want to grab that one, that mic? Sorry, I'm like holding my, yeah, so, is it on?
Okay, it's on.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, y'all give it up for Patrick and running the sound.
Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you, Patrick. And I mean, my other question is what kind of music do you go back and get and bring into the present? But whatever you want to talk about, if you want to talk about why this electric Miles is important to you, or if there's a music that you go back to bring into the present.
Yeah, I'll just answer briefly. The thing that I really grasped from this music is a sense of fearlessness. You know, at the time when they were doing this, they didn't know it would be an amazing album. They didn't know, you know, if anybody would like it, but they pursued the art and they pursued the unknown. And I think a lot of what we do as musicians, the greatness comes out of when we do kind of step outside of that comfort zone, outside of what's safe and what's already known, to try to create something new. So the other question was, what do I necessarily take back?
What do you go back and get bring to the present?
You know, there's a lot of things, but probably from the very beginning is my grandmother. She's she was a pastor for many years, and there was a certain way that she would particularly preach in certain keys and certain inflections, and when I'm really, really playing, I try to capture that. So.
Oh, wow,
yeah.
beautiful, beautiful, thank you. Okay, Travis, do you want to answer? You're gonna go? Okay, I think that we can't top that, so we're gonna turn this off or whatever. Okay, I'm just getting out of your way. Okay, thank you.
That's it for tonight. Thank you all for coming out. I'd like to call out everybody on the band tonight. We have Matt Henry on percussion this evening. Antonio Foster on keyboard. Ben Dickey on drums. Kendrick Smith on multiple saxophones. Danny Campbell on trumpet. Bernard Terry on bass. I'm Travis Lewis. This is my boss, Darren Jackson, so let's give a really big applause for him. A really big one, yeah. It's employee review season, so let's give a really big one. Anyway, thank you all for coming out. Hope to see you soon. We have music here every Wednesday through Saturday, so please, and sometimes Sundays. Anyway, be safe getting home. Have a good night.